In South Yorkshire on the M18, the southbound exit to the southbound M1 is closed where a car's broken down at the M1 turnoff. And in Greater Manchester, the A577 Southgate closed on that one-way stretch through Wigan because of flooding. In Nottinghamshire, south of Ollerton, the A614 remains closed along the Old Rufford Road at the Billsthorpe turnoff at the scene of a four-vehicle collision. In Leicester city centre, the A50 is closed on High Cross Street because of an unsafe building. In Surrey, south of Farnham, the A287 at Frensham closed following an accident. And ScotRail train suspended Aberdeen to Inverness after a car hit a bridge at Inverurie. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
There's still plenty of time to grab your chance to win a whopping £36,000 cash in the Great British Giveaway. That's like having £3,000 each month for an entire year. Extra cash in your bank account that you can do whatever you like with. Take a year off and keep it to yourself. You don't even need to tell the taxman, as it's totally tax-free. For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB08 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates.
You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister. Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
This Sunday, join me, Camilla Tominey, for an exclusive interview with one of the most controversial, influential and unique political figures of our time. Boris Johnson will be in studio discussing his new memoir, Unleashed, the gripping story of how he dealt with plotting politicians, problematic princes and a pandemic. From Boris bikes to Brexit and everything else in between. This Sunday at 9:30 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very good evening to you. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GBN Tonight. Now, party conference season is almost over with just the Tories left to finish up before Parliament returns next week. But one thing has been made very, very clear. The Tories are in major need of reform. Nigel Farage's kind of reform. Because Tory heavyweights are warning that the Conservative Party might disappear if they don't move to the right. But in a moment, I'll be asking a Tory why they think reform will even want them. Next up today marks the end of an era. Sad moment. Britain has closed its last surviving coal-fired power station in a move that coincides also with the closure of the last blast furnace at one of the world's biggest steelworks in Wales. Thousands will wake up tomorrow without jobs in a move that is bound to have devastating effects on its local communities. I'll be speaking to Lee Anderson about this in a bit. Of course, a former coal miner. And record numbers of asylum seekers claiming to be children have been caught out after they lied to gain extra protection from being sent home. Now, 2 years ago, an aspiring Royal Marine was fatally stabbed by an illegal immigrant pretending to be 14 years old when actually he was 19 and a double killer. When will the government learn its lesson? Welcome to the show. We've got a cracker ahead. All of that to come, so do get in touch with your thoughts on today's topics by going to gbnews.com/your say. Is it a good idea for reform and the Tory parties have a non-aggression pact, or is that the way madness lies? Let me know your thoughts, but first, here's your news headlines, and it's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good evening. These are your headlines at 7 o'clock. It's being reported that Israel has informed the US of plans for a potential ground assault on Lebanon, with troops reportedly positioned for an incursion. It comes as the country's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, said there is nowhere in the Middle East that Israel cannot reach. Meanwhile, Reuters is reporting Hezbollah has attacked Israel using a ballistic missile. It comes after the Lebanese Prime Minister has said up to 1 million people have been displaced as fighting between Israel and Hezbollah continues. The UK government has confirmed this afternoon that it secured more seats on commercial aircrafts to allow British nationals to leave Lebanon. Now, back in the UK, Tory leadership contender Kemi Badenoch has now said that we should find a way to make life easier for those who are starting families. Ms Badenoch was speaking at an event with the Conservative Women's Organisation and said people are scared to have families. This comes fresh off the back of comments she made over the level of maternity pay being excessive. Ms Badenoch has since gone back on this, saying her comment was part of a longer discussion.
I think maternity pay is quite important, and this was actually a long discussion we were having about the role of the state in deciding what businesses should do. We need to decide who's going to be leader of the party, not the left, not the Guardian, not the BBC, just Conservatives. I was interrupted as I was answering a different question. The point I'm making is that if we lighten the burden on business, they will be able to help solve these problems, rather than what Kate was asking me, should the government increase it, should the government do this or that? There is too much government already. Things aren't getting any better. Maybe we should try something else.
Now, in other news, police have named an 8-year-old boy who died after being shot on a farm in Cumbria as Jay Cartmel of Frizington. Cumbria police said they were called to reports of the boy being injured by a firearm on Saturday. He was taken to hospital and sadly died overnight, having suffered injuries to his head and face. A man has now been arrested on suspicion of gross negligent manslaughter and has been bailed. Now, teachers have accepted the government's 5.5% pay rise offer. 95% of National Education Union members who responded voted to accept the pay offer. The union's General Secretary, Daniel Kabidi, said our members should be proud of what they have achieved through a hard-fought campaign. And the UK's biggest steelworks has ended production today after more than a century of operation. Blast Furnace 4 is the final furnace operating at Tata Steel's plant in Port Talbot. From today, it'll be shut down, putting around 2,000 people out of work. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Martin.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Now, welcome to GBN Tonight with me, Martin Daubney. Well, day 2 of the Tory party conference, and the best idea that's come out of it so far is for the Conservatives to stand down and to let reform through. Tory heavyweight and Brexiteer Lord Frost warned that the Tories could disappear if they don't move to the right. And the former Prime Minister Liz Truss even admitted that she lost her seat because of reform. And earlier today, my fellow GB News presenter and the former chairman of the Tory party, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, suggested that the Tories should step aside in seats that reform can win.
Now, what if we were to say at the next election, as we did to the Liberal Unionists, we will not oppose reform in those 98 seats? I would certainly be open to that as a real opportunity to reform, to win seats from Labour.
Superb stuff. Now, surely, if reform need to learn from the Liberals by putting all the resources where we know they're going to win, then surely the Tories need to do the same. Well, joining me live from Birmingham is a Conservative MP for Rayleigh and Wickford, Mark Francois, one of the giants of Brexit. Mark, always an absolute delight to have you on the show. So, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg put the cat amongst the pigeons. Last time, Nigel Farage stood aside. Next time, is it time for the Tories to play second fiddle?
Well, Jacob is a very old friend of mine. We go back many years. But on this one, I'm afraid I see it slightly differently. You know, I've just fought a very difficult general election campaign, and, you know, Reform are out there to defeat us. They weren't there to help us. they were trying to take us out. So I think it's far too soon to talk about any kind of pact or alliance with Reform, not when we've just fought a very difficult general election with them opposing our candidates.
But Mark, as you know, there's been a lot of talk for a long time about Reform splitting the vote in seats they can't win in, and that's why, in fact, Nigel Farage took that decision to stand down in over 300 seats, handed a huge majority to your party when Boris was the Prime Minister. And now it seems like when you look at the metrics, there are a lot of seats that the Tory party can't win from the Labour Party. Reform field of very, very strong campaigns, very strong candidates. So in terms of pure metrics, if you want to get the Labour Party out, maybe it's time to do some sort of non-aggression pact. That's the precise thing that the Labour Party have been doing, the Liberal Democrats. Pool your resources, fight where you can win to get the Labour Party out of power. Surely that's your common goal.
I think it's too early for that, for the reason I've just given. But this I will say, it is true that in 2019, Nigel stood down a number of then the Brexit Party candidates because he realised that only if the Conservatives won with a good majority, after 3 years of absolute stalemate in Parliament, would we be able to complete Brexit and leave the European Union, which we did. It is also true that at the time, my party did not say thank you, when we probably should have done. And I think a lot of the tension between ourselves and Reform, if I'm being candid, goes back to that time. And I know people that were in the Brexit Party and are now in Reform who have never really forgiven us for not thanking them for doing the right thing. So I understand why they feel strongly on this, but I still think it is too early, having just come through a grueling general election, to be talking about pacts and alliances. But let us see how this pans out over the next few years. I hope that is a balanced and reasonable reply.
Well, you say that thanks need to be given. A thank you to Nigel Farage, what would that look like? A bottle of champagne? I think he's got enough of those. What kind of thank you do you think he would respond to, Mark?
No, I mean, my point is, and I'm being candid here, we should have said thank you at the time, and we didn't.
Yeah, but you didn't.
And I happen to know that, well, but I've just admitted that. You know, I've been candid about it, and there were a lot of shouting matches within the Brexit Party when he took that decision. And the Conservative Party then won by 80 seats, and the Conservative Party did not thank him for taking that decision. And as I say, I mean, that was 5 years ago now. As I say, I think a lot of the tension between us and Reform, I'm trying to give a very sensible answer to your question, rather than play knockabout with it. I think a lot of the tension between our party and what was the Brexit Party and is now the Reform Party goes back to that episode in 2019. Does that mean we could never cooperate with them? Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
And so what might that look like? Because there's a lot of people thinking, Mark, that the Brexit Party as it was then, and I was a candidate for the Brexit Party, I stood against Lee Anderson in Ashfield. He's on the show later on. We're great friends now. We put our differences to one side. The best man won. I stood and fought. A lot didn't. A lot of people felt, Mark Francois, that the Tory party was granted a massive majority that you simply squandered. And we find ourselves in a position now of thinking, well, what was the point in handing those seats over to the Conservative Party? So therefore, with the benefit of hindsight, with the knowledge of history and your own admission that there was no thanks at the time, surely a more sensible, grown-up route is to try and work to unite the right, to get the Labour Party out of power. I know you're being candid, but I prefer it if you're more direct.
Well, here's someone who's accusing me of not being direct. What we're for here this week, you know, we have to choose a party leader. I'm not going to be the leader of the Conservative Party on the 2nd of November. One of 4 people are. I've come out for Robert Jenrick, partly because I think he's taken a very robust and sensible attitude on the ECHR, something that we need to do to win back Reform voters. But what you're talking about is going to be something that our new leader, I hope it's Robert, but whoever our members pick, is going to have to think about very carefully, and I'm not going to preempt whoever wins that competition. But I do think if we do have to have some discussions in the future, I think the best person to even consider that is Robert Jenrick.
There we go, Mark Francois, superb. So, Mark, if Robert Jenrick gets in, he might be the right man to speak to Nigel Farage. Mark Francois, thank you for giving us your time at the conference to speak to us here on GBN tonight. Thank you very much. Now, joining me now in my panel is Trevor Kavanagh and the former political editor of the Sun, and GBNews political editor, commentator, Nigel Nelson. Let's start with again. Let's start with you. I just think here there's a good idea waiting to get out. Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, he's not an MP anymore, but he's floated the idea out there. A lot of people, in response to this idea today, have been saying one of 2 things. Yes, absolutely, we need to unite the vote to get the Labour Party out of power. And secondly, no chance at all, the Conservatives can't be trusted. What's your take?
Well, I think what Jacob said articulated a view which is echoed right through the Conservative Party, at least out in the constituencies among Conservative supporters. And I think that there's a certain inevitability about this because the Reform Party stands where former Tory voters who have moved away from the Tories to either Labour or to Reform, that's where they stand. They actually are the voters who have abandoned the Tories. So it's a constituency which is waiting to be picked up. Nigel has more or less picked it up. The second thing is that none of the existing 4 candidates would want to do a deal with Reform, but they may be forced. And the reason for that is that Nigel, according to the latest opinion polls, is far more popular than any of them. And in fact, in some cases, added together.
And isn't that the trouble, Nigel Nelson, that if we look back to coalitions, can you imagine Nigel Farage playing the role of Nick Clegg?
No, not at all. I mean, the only way that the Tories and Reform could combine is if Nigel was leading it. So I don't think that's going to happen. I also don't see any reason why the Tories should go this way. This was a really weird election. So we ended up in a situation where a third of the voters ended up, because of first past the post, delivering 2/3 of the MPs. That means that vote is actually quite fragile. So I hope Labour manage to get their 10 years in power to complete their programme. But if I was sitting there in the Tory party, I'd be saying, the next election is not lost. The Tory party can win it as the Tories. And in the meantime, we don't know what will happen to Reform. In the interim, we've still got another 5 years to go before the election comes round. Reform may not be with us by that time.
Well, OK, so, Trevor, is part of the problem here is that the Conservatives, they're the Conservatives. They have this sense of entitlement. We're the ones who brokered deals. You should bow to our demands. And that happened in 2019. Now, the brand, as Nigel Farage said earlier on today, the brand is broken. The brand is in huge trouble. Have they got the credibility, the trust and the competence left? Does it have to be a public arrangement? Could there be some backroom deal? I mean, it seems to me like the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats weren't treading on each other's toes in a huge amount of constituencies. They didn't seem to campaign where they knew each other couldn't win. They deployed resources intelligently and maybe even covertly. Could that work?
Well, first of all, I think that feeling of self-entitlement is gone. It's been destroyed. But I do think there's something else. I mean, there's a really strong likelihood that none of the 4 candidates, whoever is the winner of this contest, will be leading the party into the next election. And for the last year and a half...
What makes you say that?
I just feel that they're very young and inexperienced, and I think they're going to have a terrific job trying to pull the Conservative Party around. It needs a very strong voice. This is where I move on to the next point. There's been a lot of talk for about 18 months about a pact at some point between a returning triumphant Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, just as there was, as you keep pointing out, in 2019. To me, that seems pretty much as impossible as anything else. but it is a runner as a rumour. And I think that Boris definitely wants to come back, given the chance, given the opening. I think there might be an opening. And if there were, then that possibility becomes a probability.
Even more juicy. Thank you very much, Trevor. Nigel, superb opening to the show. Now, coming up, Tata Steel's final blast furnace at Port Talbot was fully shut down, sadly, at 5 p.m. today. And Britain's last surviving coal-fired power station also finally closed its embers. Thousands of job losses and an impact on communities no one in government seems to fully comprehend. I'll have Lee Anderson on this next.
I'm Mark Dolan and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
In October, a new collection of portraits will be unveiled which record some of the most impactful women of modern times, including Elizabeth Taylor in her role as Cleopatra, Beyoncé, Princess Diana and Veronica Lake. The pieces were created in tandem by the artistic duo Sequin Kay and Jerry Kinch, and they join me now. Jerry, tell us a bit about how you got into making these portraits.
Yeah, so Sequin and I have been walking in and out of each other's lives for like 9 or 10 years now. And although our art is very different to my art, we've always sort of said we'll do something together, you know. I mean, our work with crystals is so different to my traditional oil painting. And it's like, you know, they say the East is East and West is West and never the twain shall meet, but we kind of proved an exception to that rule. And we've done something here quite unique, you know. Painting's been my whole life, you know, ever since I was a child, you know. It's been something that's always kept me in good stead, you know. It's something that I think jumped over from my grandfather. He was a painter of the churches in Ireland, and ever since I was a child I just painted naturally, and you know, it's always been a way for me to earn a living as well.
Sequin, as I speak to you, I hope we're going to reveal a portrait that has been brought in. This is a 6-foot portrait of Veronica Lake. And to Jerry's work, you have applied what I would call sequins, Swarovski crystals. How do you apply them?
The Swarovski crystals have been applied one by one in a sort of a meditative state. And I use a syringe with the strongest glue in the world and also some little tools. And they're just placed on one by one. So it's sort of like a modern-day pointillism, I would say.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Martin Daubney. Now, the remaining embers of Britain's last coal-fired power station at Ratcliffe-on-Soar have finally been smouldered down. As a kid, I could see the plumes of steam from Ratcliffe, fired by coal dug by my dad, Bob, who worked at nearby Cockgrave Pit for 47 years. There he is in his prime. Now, today marks the end of more than 140 years of the coal industry in the UK. That's my dad, Bob, again. But it's no coincidence that today the last blast furnace at Port Talbot was also extinguished for the final time. Now, of course, the death of coal and steel has been a hurrah by the Labour Party and the net zero zealots. Well, joining me now is the man who knows a thing or two about life underground, and that is, of course, Lee Anderson, MP for Ashfield and a former coal miner himself. Lee, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. We've spoken before, Lee, about the importance and the integrity and the pride that coal gave to Britain, to the working classes, to the Midlands. Today's final winding down of Ratcliffe on Soar is talismanic. Lee Anderson, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, it is, Martin. It is a sad day indeed. I've got a close affinity with this power station. In fact, not only did your dad work at a coal mine which supplied coal to this power station, I also worked at a coal mine, Welbeck Colliery, which supplied coal to this power station back in the day. I actually went on a visit there many, many years ago, and I catch the train to London right at the side of this power station, East Midlands Parkway, every single week. Be very, very sad to see it go. But this, Martin, actually is a massive act of self-harm in our country once again. We've seen the steelworks go, we've seen oil refinery go, we've seen the last coal-fired power station go. And guess what? We still need these things. We need steel, we need coal, we need all this, Martin. It's absolute madness. And like you just said in your introduction there'll be some lunatics around the net zero lunatics. They'll be partying tonight. You know what? There's a lot of people in this country scratching their heads and thinking, why do we let this madness continue, mate? It's absolute lunacy.
But we've seen with this Labour government, the direction of travel couldn't be clearer. North Sea oil, well, it's just stop oil as far as Labour Party are concerned. We've seen with Port Talbot, OK, that was been winding down for some time. It's Labour Party that put the final stake through its heart today. The same with Ratcliffe. And we saw with Whitehaven, the proposed coal mine up in Cumbria last week, Lee Anderson. They're all getting the chop because of net zero. Now, we haven't seen any jobs emerging. We were promised thousands of jobs. Where are they?
Well, this is how ridiculous it is, Martin. If you just go up a couple of hours up into North Yorkshire, we have Drax Power Station. This Drax Power Station was at one time burning coal from a local coal mine. And guess what? The stupidity, the stupid times we're living at the moment. We're now importing wood from North America. We are chopping down trees and forests and shipping this over the Atlantic in diesel guzzling cargo ships, making it into wood pellets, and then grinding it, and we're burning it in Drax Power Station. We are told this is renewable energy because trees will grow again. And guess what? It's costing us, or costing everybody in the country, £1 million a day in subsidies to keep this power station open. It's absolute madness. The lunatics have taken over the asylum.
Lee, this is proof, do you think, that the Labour Party, they used to represent the working man. I mean, back in the days of all the coal strikes, the Labour Party was very much in favour of the working man, of the coal mines staying open. Coal, not dole. In fact, they were shouting, now it's dole, not coal.
It is, yeah. I mean, my dad was a striking miner. All my family were striking miners. Most of the men in my family worked down the pits, including me. I was the last one to go down the pit. You know what? And the Labour Party, let's be honest, Martin, over the years and years, they made a good living on the backs of coal miners. There were hundreds of thousands of us at one time paying our subs. Same with the heavy industries, well, like the power stations and the steel industry and the transport industry. Useful idiots, that's what we were, Martin. We were paying our money in, keeping them afloat, and now they've turned their back on us.
OK, Lee, as I have you here, I want to talk to you about the Tory party conference. Of course, Jacob Rees-Mogg. It's a time for flying kites at conference, and a pretty big kite's been flown in your direction today, Lee Anderson. Jacob Rees-Mogg suggesting that this time the Conservatives should nobly stand aside to allow the Reform Party to go for all those seats, 98 seats, in fact, where they came second at the last generation. Would you, as the chief whip of the party, be up for the idea of a pact with the Tories?
Well, listen, it's a little bit early in the day for that. I've got the greatest respect for Jacob. He's a very kind man, he's a gentleman. But look, he's quite right. In 90-odd seats, we come second. I won my seat in Ashfield, Martin. I was the only Red Wall MP to retain the seat, and I did that under Reform flag. So I think we could win those seats on our own merit anyway. But look, we've seen the damage the Labour government's done already in just a few short weeks. In 3 or 4 years' time, the political landscape could be completely different. There could be untold damage done by these lunatics in power at the moment. So let's see where we are in 3 or 4 years' time. At the moment, I think we've got nothing to fear from the Labour or the Conservative Party.
Lee Anderson, just yes or no, if the Tory party said to Nigel, we're going to stand aside in 98 seats, would you say thank you very much? You know you would.
No, I'd just say go for it. Do what you want. I'm not interested.
Very tactfully put. Shame you had a few more drinks. Lee Anderson, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Always an absolute delight to have your company. Well, join me now back in the studio is my panel of Trevor Kavanagh, and also he's a former political editor of The Sun, and of course, and GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Nigel, let's start with you this time about the fact we all know, historically, the Labour Party was the party of labourers, of the working class.
Yes, it was.
Of the working man. And now the last vestiges of British industry in one day have been consigned to the scrap heap. That's happened on the Labour Party's watch.
Well, I mean, it's been coming for some time. I mean, it was the Tory party that originally agreed the target to get rid of coal, and all that's happened is it's happened a year early. It's the right thing to do. And the same thing applies to steel. It doesn't mean steel making is over in this country. What Tata Steel is now doing is replacing the blast furnaces using fossil fuels, and by 2028 they'll have electric arc furnaces which are environmentally friendly.
It's inferior steel, and it provides much fewer jobs.
Well, I mean, it does there. It does in the steel industry. You're absolutely right. I'm not sure about inferior steel. It rather depends what they're coming up with.
Because blast furnace steel is much stronger than arc furnace steel. It's a proven fact. It has much more structure.
Yeah, I mean, they're used for different.
And we'll keep importing it from China and India.
Obviously, there's different steel for different things, but this stuff should be able to go and build the wind turbines that we're trying to get. The point really is that this is a journey towards net zero. If it works out properly, we're talking about 650,000 green jobs that will follow.
Where are they? I've been hearing this for months and months. Well, I've asked endless ministers on my programmes, where are these jobs? There aren't any. We haven't seen any evidence.
Well, we're only 3 months out of the election, so we've now got Great British Energy off and running, which will be the facilitator to start the process of getting those jobs. So as we progress more with the green agenda, that a lot of people will be able to take up green jobs as a result.
Trevor, there's a feeling that this is all smoke and mirrors. Now, the bottom line is, working class communities have been eviscerated since the 1990s. They were promised time and time again more jobs in deprived areas. It hasn't happened. Do you have any faith that these green jobs will miraculously materialise and these communities will be thrown a lifeline? Or are they just victims? They're just meat and drink thrown to the scrap heap by the Labour Party?
Yes, I think we're losing a great deal through the demented pursuit of a completely fictitious deadline for net zero. The idea that we're going to get all of this done by 2030 is nonsense. And I think that we're being thrown to the wolves in the sense of our position internationally as a competitive industrialised nation by the notion that we can simply stop using our own domestic fuel and carry on, as you say, keep importing at huge expense from other countries. I mean, shipping this stuff across is the most inefficient way of transporting anything. Shipping is really heavy duty. You're pushing against a wall of water all the way, and yet we've got it on our doorstep, and they're shutting it down. And this is an act of zealotry by the Labour Party to pursue Ed Miliband's, I think, mad target of 2030.
OK, Trevor, Nigel, thank you very much. Now, coming up after the break, the United Nations has confirmed that a Hamas leader in Lebanon who was killed in an Israeli airstrike was employed by one of its agencies. More on that incredible story next.
Hi there, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. The next 24 hours stays damp and blustery in the east, but it does dry up elsewhere. Brighter skies coming along in the west later on Tuesday. Finally, a drier period to give us all a respite from all the rain, but it is going to take its time as this low slowly clears eastwards. It's still going to bring further rain to northern England, into parts of the Midlands overnight, East Anglia, as well as North Wales. Now, that rain does turn more showery in the west, the north and the northwest, seeing plenty of clear spells overnight under those clear skies. Temperatures falling into the single figures. But it's blustery elsewhere as we start off Tuesday, and there's certainly more rain to come across parts of East Midlands into East Anglia and down that North Sea coast. Now, we've got a few showers across Aberdeenshire into the Great Glen, but otherwise plenty of bright weather across much of northern and western Scotland. Northern Ireland, a lovely start to the day. Blue skies here, just one or two mist patches. Likewise for northwest England, but for Wales and the southwest, areas of cloud floating about and a few showers. Nevertheless, it's the eastern side of England where we continue to see a strong wind, gales for some exposed North Sea coasts and further spells of rain. The rain tending to become lighter through the day, but it's going to stay feeling miserable, I think, under that wet weather and with a lot of low cloud along with the brisk breeze. Temperatures of 12 or 13 Celsius in the east, whilst further west where we do get some sunshine, 15 to 17 degrees. Now into Wednesday, there'll be yet more showers coming in on a northeasterly breeze across parts of East Anglia into the southeast. But elsewhere, much brighter skies. Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, West Wales and the southwest seeing plenty of sunshine. Those sunny skies transfer east through Thursday and into Friday. So a few days, at least, of drier and brighter weather.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Martin Daubney. Now, the UNRWA, and that's the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, has confirmed that Fateh al-Sharif, a Hamas leader in Lebanon who was killed today in an Israeli airstrike, was an employee. He was killed along with his wife and children during an airstrike on the Al-Bas refugee camp. Sharif was reportedly the principal of the UNRWA-run Daya Yassin Secondary School in Al-Bas, and the agency said that Sharif had been under investigations because of his political activities and had been on administrative leave since March. It's an incredible story. And joining me now to discuss this is Major Andrew Fox, the Research Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Always a pleasure to have you on the show, Major Fox. What's your take on the fact that once again it seems that people with nefarious terrorist connections are actually on the payroll of the UN?
Yeah, it's the latest in a long line of very sordid tales about UNRWA. We're looking back now at the October 7th massacre, where 9 employees were found to have been involved. Israel gave the names of 100 UNRWA workers to the UN who've done nothing with those. Each one of those 100 workers were found to be Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad militants. 30 buildings from UNRWA in Gaza were found to be connected to the terror tunnel system. And really, it's hardly surprising to find out that yet another member of UNRWA is deeply connected to Hamas.
What does this say about the credibility or the neutrality or the political leanings, would you believe, of the United Nations on the whole? I mean, we've seen repeatedly votes, speeches, condemnations of everything that Israel do. Are they politically neutral? Can they be trusted? Or do they have, would you believe, some kind of agenda?
No, there's a deeply strong anti-Israel agenda in the UN. I gave a speech there myself just last week, and the hypocrisy dripped from every brick of the building in terms of the way they profess peace and yet embrace a variety of different countries who have deeply suspect human rights records. The most worrying thing about this whole factor, though, is the fact that the new Labour government resumed funding to UNRWA, in spite of all the things we know about them and their activities in Gaza. And that's our tax money that is going directly to fund these people.
And so with that all in mind, what do you think that says about the future of this organisation and, in fact, the future of the UN as a whole?
Well, the UN's future is probably fairly safe at this point, but with UNRWA particularly, I think the Israelis have made very clear that they're not prepared to work with them at any point in Gaza in the future. So whatever the resolution of this whole conflict in both Lebanon and Gaza turns out to be, I think we can very safely say that UNRWA doesn't have a role to play in future.
And Major Fox, you've got significant experience of tours of fighting in Afghanistan, special forces connections. So militarily the Middle East, the area. In terms of the latest manoeuvres against Lebanon, the extraordinary story we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, the grim bleepers, that terrorist attack, and now the very targeted bunker bombs taking out the head of the snake of Hezbollah. Do you think that Israel are turning a corner in this conflict and they're pushing on, irrespective of what the UN might say, or indeed Sir Keir Starmer or anybody else might say?
I think we've reached a pretty strategic junction here, and it's going to be very interesting to see what Israel does next. Everything we're seeing suggests there's going to be a ground invasion. There's no question that Hezbollah are weakened by the fact that almost their entire command chain at the senior level has been taken out by Israel. But what Israel are going to achieve with a ground operation is still to be seen. It's a much harder bit of terrain to fight in than Gaza. There are rocky mountainsides. The tunnels there are dug into chalk rather than sand as they are in Gaza. And Hezbollah are an experienced fighting force. They've got huge amounts of experience from fighting for Bashar al-Assad in Syria during his civil war, where they committed numerous atrocities. So it's not going to be an easy fight for Israel, even if Hezbollah are weakened. So we'll be watching that with interest to see how it unfolds.
OK, Major Andrew Fox, Research Fellow of the Henry Jackson Society. Thank you for coming on the show. Always a pleasure to have your expertise and your company. Thank you very much. Now, back in the studio, I'm still joined by my panel. That's Trevor Kavanagh and he was the former political editor of The Sun, and GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Gentlemen, welcome back. Trevor, let's start with you. It just seems incredible, is it not, that the United Nations organisations can have these affiliations, and yet it seems to be happening time and time again?
No, it doesn't seem incredible, frankly. I think that this is the path of the United Nations over many decades. And what I'd be very interested to watch is how the BBC cover this revelation, which is totally counter to their support for UNRWA during the earlier revelations about many of their members being involved in terrorism, and were given a very warm embrace by the BBC. But I think that this is a situation which the Israelis have been vindicated on so many fronts in the last few days, over the last, say, 10 days since the Grim Bleeper attacks. They have shown the Western world, the supine Western world, what it means to be leaders of the Western democracies. And it's about time that we woke up here in Britain and in Europe and even in America to the threat from people who wish us great harm. And the Iranian-backed Hezbollah and Hamas and Houthis do wish us great harm. And yet we seem to be saying that we cannot supply Israel with the weapons and the components that they need to defend themselves from these terrors.
Nigel, do you think that the Labour Party's stance on this is going to hurt them? At a time when we've seen Benjamin Netanyahu just push on. He's a man on a mission, irrespective of what the West might think. And when you see Sir Keir Starmer, David Lammy at the UN basically saying, put down weapons.
And President Biden.
says, well, the Western leaders in general, what right do they have to tell Israel that it can or cannot defend itself?
Because we've all got skin in this game. That in the event that all this goes wrong, Hezbollah is an Iranian-backed proxy, just the same as Hamas is. If Iran gets drawn into this war, that will draw America in and will probably draw us in. And so it's quite understandable that we're trying very hard to see if we can try and keep some sort of peace in the Middle East.
But there are billions of dollars given by the Barack Obama regime to Iran to try and, encourage them not to get involved militarily. That didn't quite work out.
That was actually to stop them developing an atomic bomb. So,
which they're close to doing.
Yeah, but they're still doing that, aren't they?
Well, we don't know. I mean, certainly Israel's greatest fear, if ever you sit in Tel Aviv or sit in Jerusalem, what everyone will tell you is they're terrified that Iran will attack and that Iran does have secret nuclear weapons. Is what Netanyahu's been saying all along.
But Trevor, with the benefit of hindsight, billions of dollars and please don't do anything, Ayatollah, we're your mates, hasn't worked out. Maybe the only answer is, the shock and awe of an attack like this from Israel.
Yes, I think that people have been sitting back and allowing Israel's enemies to get the upper hand over recent years. And Israel's enemies are our enemies. These people are not just worried about Israel, although that's their focus and obsession. They are interested in infiltrating the societies of the Western world and wreaking similar havoc at any point. I mean, we're blind to this. We seem to be completely obsessed with the fact that we cannot say a word against the extremists of the Muslim world for fear of being accused of Islamophobia and racism. But we are closing our eyes to a genuine, long-term, serious threat.
Trevor, Nigel, thank you very much. Excellent as ever. Now, coming up shortly, more than 1,300 asylum seekers were caught pretending to be children in the first half of this year, setting an all-time new record high as young men pose as teenage boys to cheat the system. What needs to happen to put an end to this farcical practice? This is GBN Tonight, only on GB News.
I'm Rees-Mogg, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This week, Free Speech Brighton, a sister group of the Free Speech Union, claimed that they were kicked out of a pub in the city for discussing trans issues in schools. The group booked a room in a pub for an evening of speeches and discussion when they claimed security guards came and asked them to leave after one speaker began to talk about this topic. Now, a clip of the evening was, in fact, posted to social media. Can you give us some background to what happened, what the event was for, and why you booked it?
Our normal pub was being refurbished, so about 3 weeks ago I went in and booked a local pub for a meeting, and they didn't ask any questions about what sort of meeting. It was in a back room. It was mainly secluded from the rest of the pub, so I thought it would be fine. But anyway, they didn't ask any questions. They took my booking. We arrived, I set up. The first speaker started speaking, who's a retired teacher who is concerned about trans in schools and how that affects children. But she was talking purely about children. She was not talking about adults who have protected characteristics, obviously. And then towards the end of her speech, I became aware of security guards standing behind me in the middle room. So I went to have a quick word with them and see what they wanted. And they said, we've had a complaint. And I said, what's the complaint? And they wouldn't say. Then they said, will you come and talk to the landlord? So I went to the front of the bar and they indicated this chap was the landlord, but he looked about 20, so I don't think he was the landlord. So I said, I hear you have a complaint about us. Can you tell me what it is? And he couldn't.
That sounds very Kafkaesque, as though you've committed a crime, but they can't tell you what the crime is.
Well, that's what I couldn't understand, because, you might... Obviously, they can't tell you who the complainant is, but they should be able to tell you what the complaint is.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Martin Dordman. Now, shocking new figures released today reveal a record number of adult migrants claiming to be children at the UK border in order to secure asylum. Now, in the first half of this year, 1,317 immigrants pretended to be minors when trying to claim asylum in the UK. Now, just 2 years ago, aspiring Royal Marine Tommy Roberts was murdered by an Afghan asylum seeker, you see him on your screen there, Lawangin Abdul Rahimzai, who was a double murderer posing as a 14-year-old child when in actual fact he was 19. Multiple attempts to intercept this guy were completely missed by the British services. Now, as we've seen, unaccompanied children are much more likely to be allowed to stay in the country and have their applications approved, which is why they lie. And in response to this, more than 2,080 disputes have been launched. Another record-breaking figure. Well, joining me now in our studio in Westminster is Robert Bates, the Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control, and, of course, my panel of Trevor Kavanagh, the former political editor of The Sun and GB News, and senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Let's start with you, Rob. Is this shocking, or is this completely commonplace now? We have a system open for abuse. They know if they pretend to be kids, they won't get deported. They're more likely, in fact, to stay. Therefore, it's simply an accident waiting to happen.
So we've had illegal migrants previously pretending to be Christian. We've had illegal migrants pretending to be homosexuals. We've now got them pretending to be children. And I think this is arguably the most dangerous of all the pretences, because let's not forget that if they're coming into the UK purporting to be children of 14, 15 or 16, they're then eligible to be put into school places, they're being put into foster care, and by their very nature they're then being exposed to young children, young British children. And as we saw with the Roberts case, we saw criminal systemic failings on every front, as far as I can decipher. This was a chap that was expelled for carrying knives, for threatening young children. So there's a real security risk that comes with this. And, obviously 1,300 have been apprehended, but how many more have been able to sneak through undetected?
The case of Lawangin Abdul Rahimzai is absolutely astonishing. When you look at it, it signifies every single failure of our forces and our institutions to protect Britons. This bloke, 19-year-old, pretended to be 14, came in on the back of a lorry illegally, pretended to be a minor. His fingerprints weren't taken. His dental records weren't taken. If his fingerprints had been taken, then Border Force and the National Crime Agency would have realised he was wanted for a double murder in Italy of 2 Serbians who he mowed down with an AK-47. This is a true story. He went on to murder Tommy Roberts, who was an aspiring Royal Marine. And the point is, his true age was discovered when he went to the dentist. A dental record, a dental check proved he was 19. There's an easy way, Rob Bates, to sort this. Anybody coming to Britain surely should be routinely and compulsorily have their dental records checked, and that will prove at a glance that you are over 18 and are not a minor. Why on earth aren't we doing that?
It should be done without question. It should be done without question. And, of course, the Conservatives are claiming that at the tail end of their administration, they were moving towards these kind of scientific devices that would allow them to gauge the age of those that were coming into the country and claiming to be children. Whether the Labour Party will continue with that, I imagine, is very, very doubtful. And even if it was to be passed, we'd obviously then have these professional bodies and scientific and doctors and what have you, downing tools and not agreeing to proceed with the necessary checks. So I think there's a systemic failure at every front. As you mentioned, the Roberts case is one of the most criminal systemic failings that I think this country's seen in a very, very long time. For him to be passed pillar to post between schools, foster schools, and for no background check to have been done. And this gets at a bigger point here, which is that so many of those coming across the channel we simply know nothing about. We don't know where they've come from. We don't know if they've got a history of criminality. We don't know what their intentions are. And yet we're happy to welcome them and disperse them around communities. And obviously there's now the instance as well that we hear about asylum seekers being allowed to go and volunteer in schools or volunteer with youth clubs without appropriate DBS checks going on. So I think there's a real need for us to realise that the magnitude of the risks that are posed by allowing undocumented asylum seekers near children.
Thank you, Rob. Let's go back to my panel now for a quick reaction to this. Trevor, it's just totally and utterly exasperating that the logical thing to do is to have a dental check on anybody who you even suspect of gaming the system, and yet we know why that doesn't happen, because the human rights lawyers complain.
Well, I think that they should have the checks, and anyone claiming to be a child who in fact turns out to be an adult should be instantly guilty of a crime for which they should be deported on the spot. I think that's a very serious offence, pretending to be a child, and, as we've heard, being given access to children's facilities, to schools and to all sorts of youth clubs. And some of the people who are doing this are here for reasons nothing to do with claiming asylum or escaping oppression. They are here because they are criminals, and they are part of a criminal gang before they even set off for Britain. And we should be cracking down on them. And our problem is that the left, and particularly the Labour Party, do not want seriously to tackle immigration.
And isn't that the point, Nigel Nelson, that the record has been the last 6 months? You bet your house on the fact it's going to get worse than the Labour Party.
Well, I don't see why. You're absolutely right. The appropriate checks should be made, and if those checks are available, there is a question mark over why they weren't being used. Certainly in disputed cases where somebody looks an adult, they've got to then, and say they're a child, they've got to prove it. But also bear in mind there are also a large number of unaccompanied children who are genuine children. I mean, I live in Kent. We're on the forefront of looking after unaccompanied children that are coming across the channel. So it's not like all these people are doing this to try and game the system.
But over 1,300 in 6 months,
take that point.
Nigel,
I do take that point, yeah.
OK, thank you very much. Now, up next, of course, is State of the Nation, and Jacob Rees-Mogg is live from the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham. Jacob, welcome to the show. And first of all, may I say, you've certainly put the cat amongst the pigeons by saying that the Tory party should graciously stand aside in 98 seats for reform in the next general election. Tell us more.
Absolutely. Well, we're here at the Tory party conference. We're discussing how the right of British politics can come together. There are 89 of those 98 seats where Labour came first and Reform second. Wouldn't it be better to have Reform MPs than Labour MPs? And I'm going to be talking to Richard Tice, the deputy leader of Reform, about whether the right of British politics can come together to get rid of this deeply grubby socialist government at the next election.
What made you have this epiphany, Sir Jacob? Was it a free bottle of champagne from Nigel?
No, actually, I recommended that the Tories and UKIP should have a pact way back when David Cameron was Prime Minister. In a first-past-the-post system, you need to make sure that your wing of politics is united. That's the way to win majorities. So that's why I thought of this many years ago, and now may be the time to bring all our friends together in the Tory party family.
Superb, and very quickly, what else have you got on State of the Nation for us tonight?
Well, I've got an exclusive interview with Nadhim Zahawi, so a perfect time to be talking to a former Chancellor about what's going on in the economy. We have growth has been downgraded today. The OECD is forecasting 1% growth. How do we get back to growth? How do we cut taxes?
Superb stuff. That's State of the Nation with Jacob Rees-Mogg. That's up next. Now, thank you to my panel tonight, Trevor Kavanagh and Nigel Nelson. Also, Robert Bates. State of the Nation is up next. Nigel Farage is back tomorrow. So here's your weather with Aidan McGibbon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. The next 24 hours stays damp and blustery in the east, but it does dry up elsewhere. Brighter skies coming along in the west later on Tuesday. Finally, a drier period to give us all a respite from all the rain, but it is going to take its time as this low slowly clears eastwards. It's still going to bring further rain to northern England, into parts of the Midlands overnight, East Anglia, as well as North Wales. Now, that rain does turn more showery in the west, the north and the northwest, seeing plenty of clear spells overnight under those clear skies. Temperatures falling into the single figures. But it's blustery elsewhere as we start off Tuesday, and there's certainly more rain to come across parts of East Midlands into East Anglia and down that North Sea coast. Now, we've got a few showers across Aberdeenshire into the Great Glen, but otherwise plenty of bright weather across much of northern and western Scotland. Northern Ireland, a lovely start to the day. Blue skies here, just one or two mist patches. Likewise for northwest England, but for Wales and the southwest, areas of cloud floating about and a few showers. Nevertheless, it's the eastern side of England where we continue to see a strong wind, gales for some exposed North Sea coasts and further spells of rain. The rain tending to become lighter through the day, but